بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. We are on ayah number 68 in Surah Yasin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings us back to earth. In the previous ayah, there was a discussion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being able to mutate and change everything in the human being. And in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about how He does change human beings. On the Day of Judgment, Allah won't change anything. He'll prevent the person from talking and speaking, and then He'll allow the limbs and organs to testify, the hands to speak, and the skin to testify. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, had He wanted, وَلَوْ نَشَاءُ لَمَسَخْنَاهُمْ, that we could actually just change them totally and completely had we wanted to, but He doesn't want to, so He doesn't do that. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the change that does occur in the human being, in this world, physiologically and physically, both. So, وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ, whomever we give an old age to, whomever we allow to live longer, نُعَمِّرْهُ, we will change him in creation. Okay. We will flip him in creation. We will reduce his strength, as the implied meaning here. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ, do they not understand? Don't they see? Don't they think? Don't they ponder? And do they not reflect and then understand this process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings man out from the mother's womb, and when he came out he knew nothing, and when he leaves the womb of this earth at an old age, he still knows nothing. He develops diseases, or becomes senile, or becomes like a handicapped child, totally dependent upon others for his movements. So when he comes into the earth, he is dependent. And if he lives his life, his full term, and when he leaves the earth, he still is dependent. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regulates life. وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ, if we give anybody, or whomever we give anybody life, we will reduce him in creation. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's nizam and system, that in time and space the body grows, it reaches a climax, then it starts to decline, where the physical evolution, if you want to call it that, development of the human being reaches an apex, and after that his mental abilities still continue to grow, and his faculties are still there, and he becomes more philosophical, he becomes more reflective, he becomes more engaged with life and the meaning of life and the purpose of life. And thereafter, after he's 70 or 80 years old, he starts to lose everything. His faculties, his cognitive faculties, his physical abilities, they start to now dwindle and even perish, and then that's the end of his life. So in this brief stay of 80, 90, 100 years, whatever it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes him from one end of the spectrum to another end of the spectrum. And this is something that man should understand. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Do they not understand? What is this about the aql? The yaqilun is from the word aql, understanding, the mind, the brain, the intellect, that even the intellect goes eventually. Illa man sha'Allah, except for those whom Allah favors, and their intellect remains intact. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now going to make this ayah a prelude to the next one. One ayah must fit into and insert into the next as a continuation of the theme of the surah, and also a continuation of the theme of one ayah blending into another ayah, as you will see, inshallah, in a few moments. But about this ayah itself, we can see the more we reflect and the more we understand how life works and how our faculties are then compromised at the end of life. It shows that we're not in control even of ourselves, of our physiology, of our biology, of our bodies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's nizam and system is such that He makes it this لِكَيْ لَا يَعْلَمَ بَعْدَ إِلْمٍ شَيْئًا, as another ayah of the Quran, so that he knows nothing after knowing. Yes, after knowing, he then knows nothing. So we see that the development of the human being is now strictly restricted to the time when he's maybe 15 until he's about 55, 60. In that brief time, he has to earn his Jannah, and he has to earn his life for the other world. And within this short span of time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him the ability and the tawfiq to do all that. And if that happens, then he is successful. And if that doesn't happen, then he's not successful. So time changes people, time changes human beings, but the fadl of Allah is still there within this time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings barakah into the limited time that human beings have, and then Allah rewards them on the Day of Judgment, so that on the Day of Judgment their limbs and organs will testify, if needed to, for their good deeds. So this could be seen as also a ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where in the previous ayat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will stamp our tongues and our everything else, and our bodies and organs and limbs and skin will testify. And that is for those who are mujrimun, and those who are criminals. And this ayah is saying that in this limited time where you don't know anything until you're about 14, 15 years old, and after that you stop knowing and learning after you're 70 plus, 80 years old. And in that time you're able to learn, you're able to think, you're able to manage your lives. And in that short time, Allah gives you the fadl and the tawfiq to do good deeds. So on the Day of Judgment, this same body might just testify for you and say, this one used his body for your pleasure and for good deeds and all of that. This is one way to understand the ayah. The other way is what is obvious, that human beings are now left bereft of any ability as they leave this world, to show that they have a new beginning. Just as the moon, when it's waning, as the Quran says in the surah, حَتَّى عَادَ كَالْعُرْجُونِ الْقَدِيمِ, it becomes like a withered, leaf of a palm tree. So now the moon becomes this way, and it has no life left. But that absence of life at the end of the moon's phases is a sign for a new beginning. So the hilal, meaning the new moon, is a sign of a new beginning, and that's why in our symbolism, Muslims use the hilal to show there's always a new beginning. That's the symbolism of the Islamic civilization, that we have the crescent to show that there's no such thing as an ending. There's everything is a new beginning. To show that we believe in life, and we believe in the future, and we believe in progress, and we believe in furthering our abilities and agenda, so that the phases of the moon reach their climax, and so on. One of the reasons for the symbolic hilal and crescent and that we have أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ, do they not understand? So aqal is there until the end of life, and when we don't have aqal, then we don't understand, and then there's nothing left after that, when a human being reaches this level of not knowing anything. So it's for man to take advantage of the limited amount of time he has to use his faculty of understanding to understand how Allah works in this world. Based on this, we have now the next ayah, which is a phenomenal ayah of the Quran and indeed of the surah. وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. We have not taught him poetry, nor is it fitting for him. Poetry is not fitting for the Nabi, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. All this is merely a reminder, meaning the Quran, and it's also an open, clear Quran, an open, clear recitation. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sums up and summarizes the intellect of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the last words of the previous ayah, أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ, do you not have any intellect? Do you not understand? If you understand, then you'll understand the intellect of a Nabi. That's how one theme blends into the other theme, the next theme. So now from the intellect of human beings, you're now addressing the intellect of the best human being, and that is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The intellect of a Nabi is the subject of many books, and is also the subject of the Quran, and is also the subject of our Aqidah, and also our issues that we have in metaphysics. There's no one who has more intellect than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is our Aqidah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is aqalun nas. He is the most intellectual of all people, as are all prophets. Prophets as a community are the most intellectual of all human beings. And here this ayah proves the point, as you will see, inshallah. Anyway, first thing about the Aqidah. When you want to understand the scope of knowledge and the scope of intellectual exercise, then you must include all the phases of human existence in the human being's life, and also in the cosmology of human beings. Someone who has the ability to talk about one or two or three issues in the world, we see that person as an expert. Okay, so somebody who's very good in medicine, or very good in engineering, or very good in some discipline, he or she becomes a master and an expert. And then we say that person has acquired a level of genius in that field, which is fine, right? Einstein arguably is a genius, but in which field? He wasn't a genius in romance, was he? He's a failure. He's a genius where? He's a genius in the field that he studied. Right? People who are geniuses in medicine, geniuses in engineering or math or whatever, or they're genius in sports analysis. So you can be a genius in that. But it's limited. The scope is very, very limited. A Nabi, his scope is vast, it's broad, and it's long, and it's deep. How so? Because a Nabi will talk to you about where you were before you came to the mother's womb. No genius is going to figure that out. A Nabi will tell you what's going to happen to you after you die. And there's no science in the world that's going to tell you that. A Nabi will tell you what will happen to you after you are resurrected from your grave. And again, no one's going to tell you that. A Nabi will tell you what's going to happen to you in the mahshar, on the day of resurrection. All the phases. A Nabi will tell you about Jannah. And a Nabi will tell you about Jahannam. A Nabi will tell you about Allah, His names, His attributes. A Nabi will tell you everything there is to know about every phase of the human being, all the realms that Allah has created, as He is Rabbul Alameen. And He'll also tell you about Allah Himself. The scope of knowledge that a Nabi has is infinitely much greater than the scope of any person who is not a Nabi. That is how you measure the intellect. Right? You don't measure the intellect simply because somebody is outstanding in one very select specialty or discipline. The scope of intellect has to be broad, so it includes all the phases of human existence in the alam arwah, before we came to the mother's womb. And in the womb, the Quran gives us knowledge through the Prophet ﷺ about what happens in the mother's womb. The Quran gives us knowledge of what happens when we are born and when we are young. And this ayah previously gives us knowledge of what happens when we are about to die, when we become senile, and then the grave and the post-grave. Okay. All this eschatology. And the knowledge of all of that comes from wahi. So a Nabi's knowledge, since it is all wahi based, is super rational and supra-rational, both. Right? Because the scope is so broad. So in front of a Nabi's scope, everybody else's scope is minuscule. It is negligible at best. Because the Nabi sees what others can't see, and the Nabi hears what others don't hear, and the Nabi knows what others can't know. And that is why the most intelligent community Allah has created is the community of the Anbiya, the community of the prophets. And this is how you measure human intellect. The human beings, right? The Anbiya, they're all human beings. قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ سَيَامَ بَشَرٌ. So the scope of human knowledge and the scope of human intelligence is going to be measured by a Nabi. The Nabi is the standard for human intellect. Whereas the Quraysh and the people of Mecca and those who received the Quran the first, the Mushrikun, and then obviously the Sahaba, their exposure to intellect was primarily through ash'ar, poets and poems. They would measure the intellect of a person based on his or her ability to compose poetry, and which they did at a genius level. Meaning the Arab poets of the Jahiliyyah were extraordinary in their ability to compose poetry, and it used to be extempore. They didn't even have to think about it. It is intuitive Right? So, in their ability to compose poetry, they developed this amazing ability to express ideas and ideals in words, which in itself is metaphysical, which in itself is super intellectual, that you can compose poetry, you can describe an event just through poetry by using words, arranging them in meters, in rhyme and rhythm, arranging them according to a scale, which is mind-boggling that instantaneously you're able to do this. So the Quraysh and the Arab, they had this amazing insight into the intellect of a human being, and they express this intellect by being able to express their feelings and their understandings and their worldview through words. So they use words to express themselves and express reality as they saw it from their point of observation through this amazing ability to compose poetry and songs and lyrics and all of that. That was the level of intellect that they were exposed to. Okay. The Quran comes, and what does it say? وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ. We didn't teach him any poetry. It just destroys the whole paradigm. It just eradicates any notion of intelligence in the realm of poetry. وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. Nor is it fitting for the Nabi to know poetry. So we deconstructed everything. Talking about being deconstructionist. Huh? This is deconstructionism at its best. You have deconstructed everything, that your whole paradigm and edifice upon which you base your intellect and your civilizational values or your tribal values has been destroyed by this one statement in the Quran where Allah says, we never taught him any poetry. Meaning poetry is irrelevant in the discussion of a Nabi's intellect. A Nabi's intellect is not to be measured according to his ability to coin phrases and words and depict pictures and ideas and ideals through words, that he brings the abstract down to the level of concrete by building this bridge with words. So the words are there, but they're not poetry. Yeah. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's his fadl on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is huge and tremendous, overrides any intellectual ability of any other human being in terms of expressing ideals, values, and abstract realities, because the Nabi has words that are truthful. The Nabi has access to words that are truthful, based on the truth, not on imagery and not on speculation. Whereas a poet, and for that matter any artist, so when you have an artist, so somebody says an artist, he is representing reality or his idea of reality through his art. Whether it's novel writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's drawing, painting, or whether it's music, or whether it's acting. You're depicting something through your expression. So the Quran is saying that we are teaching the Prophet ﷺ how to depict reality through reality and with reality, not through imagery, okay, and not through this expression that is artistic, that you need to get on the stage, or you need to write, or you need to draw or paint, or you need to compose music in order to express a certain reality that is there. That is an ordinary ability for ordinary human beings. This is how we justify poetry. Now, it's not that the Sahaba didn't know poetry. They knew poetry. And it's not that the Prophet ﷺ also didn't know poetry. He also knew poetry. And it's not that the Muslims didn't compose poetry after this. They did. Okay? And obviously our books are filled with poetry, and we teach poetry here at Dar al-Qasim. Right? So that you read and you learn to understand expression and so on. But that is not the point. The point is that wahi, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is about depicting reality with reality and through reality, not through something that's based on an image or a concept or an idea or an ideal in the mind of an artist. Yeah. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings forward this idea that, first of all, your intellect dwindles when you get old. That if we give you a long life, we're going to reduce you in your creation. Don't you understand? So your understanding dwindles, and at the end of your lives, most of us, hopefully not all of us, inshallah, will lose our ability to see and to think clearly. We become handicapped. A Nabi's intellect never dies. That's the first thing. That when the Nabi leaves this world, his intellect is fine. It is perfect. And his intellect is enhanced once he goes into the grave. Number one. Number two, that a Nabi does not need to resort to the tools of expression that other human beings have in order to convey the message. So a Nabi's role is to convey the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence then the Quran says, In huwa illa dhikrun. This is not anything except a reminder, a dhikr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a dhikr. Meaning the Quran is a dhikr. The Quran is not poetry. The Quran is a reminder, and the Quran brings you from the person who is remembering to the one who is remembered. Okay, from the dhakir to madhkur. So the one whom you are supposed to remember is now the purpose of the Quran, that we want you to get from the creation to the creator, and that only a Nabi can do. A non-Nabi can't do that, and this is the role of the Quran, that the Quran is there, not merely or simply as a miracle of expression, which the Quran is. There's no way to compare the Arabic of the Quran with the Arabic of any poet or the Arabic of all poets put together. We know that from our understanding the words of the Quran and the ayat of the Quran and so on. But more than that, the message of the Quran is so grand that it transcends time and space. Dhikr. Dhikr is something that transcends time and space. Yeah. So the dhikr will help you in your grave. The dhikr will help you on the Day of Judgment. The dhikr will help you in Jannah. So wherever you are and whichever phase of reality you exist in, you will be there, and the Quran will be there, and your dhikr will be there. Whereas a poet's imagination will only get you so far, and the poet is only able to depict certain ideas and ideals within the framework of his imagination, and his imagination is limited to whatever it is he knows, and what he knows is limited to this dunya. Yeah. The Quran does not negate that human beings know something about the dunya, as the Quran says about the Rum, يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, that they know the apparent of this dunya. Yeah, they can understand some issues of this dunya. This is how this dunya works, this is how this world works, and this is how now all the components of the world they may be able to gather and corral, and they may be able to deduce, and they may be able to conclude into it about this world. This is fine. But the Quran goes much further than that, and the Quran speaks about another world which exists as we speak. That world is the other world, and the Quran speaks to that, speaks about that. The Quran then speaks about everything that is real, and that's the meaning of the word dhikr. In huwa illa dhikrun. It is a dhikr, a form of remembrance, and it's also a reminder to where we are going back towards. Inshallah, the life in this world is a retreat back towards Jannah. وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. And then it's an open Quran, an open recitation where the words of poetry are not to be measured this way, and the Quran is not to be measured against poetry. The Quran is fundamentally a book of truth, a book of ahkam, laws and rules and regulations, a book of aqidah, a book of understanding how human beings must live in this world, and a book of understanding what the other world is about. It's an open recitation. It's an open Quran where it's supposed to be recited, but it's not composed. It is revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the mind and the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he then receives, he then memorizes, and he then recites so that others can recite after him and others can recite with him. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarizes the intellect of this Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Quran raised his intellectual abilities and his portfolio, if you want, to a level that cannot be paralleled and cannot be passed in this world or the world hereafter. This is the fadila, the merit and the honor Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and all of that being an ummi. All of this is, despite being an ummi, he is unlettered. He didn't pick up a pen except once. So he didn't write, he didn't read. And since he didn't write or read, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him immense knowledge. So those who were into poetry, they knew how to read and write. And that's how they composed poetry, and that's how they wrote poetry, and so on. But here with the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was left al-ummi, and he was still able to bring down this Quran as wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is Allah's mu'jizah for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mu'jizah for the ummah. It's its recitation. Quran here means recitation. It doesn't mean the proper noun, the alam. The beauty of the Quran is its recitation. Now, when you listen to the Quran as the Sahaba would listen, you would understand and you would gauge the depth of the meaning of the Quran almost instantaneously, as it is recited by the Prophet ﷺ, because it was in their blood. Even those who rejected the Quran understood the beauty of the Quran instantaneously in the way it was crafted, in the way it was revealed, and in the way it was recited. Now, since we don't have that ability anymore, we lost that ability after 3 or 4 generations. We needed then to develop the science of sarf al-nahwu, and the science of lugha, and the science of kalam, of badi', ma'ani, and all of these rules of rhetoric, and all of the rules of balagha of the Quran, so that we can appreciate what the beauty of the Quran is post-studying. But the Sahaba understood the beauty of the Quran instantaneously. You must appreciate this point. So how come they understood? Because that's who they were, right? We don't, because we're not in that phase. We're not in that period of the Prophet's life, nor the life afterwards. We are now far removed from that, so we don't have the technical ability to understand the Quran the way the Sahaba understood the Quran instantaneously as they were reciting the Quran. So we go through a process after which we learn and after which we understand. So the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, when they accepted Islam, and they understood the beauty of the Quran, and they understood all the nuances of the Arabic language, and they saw that there was no match to the literary beauty, the aesthetic beauty of the Quran, the words and the depth and the meanings, and all the nuances that came along with the language, and so on. So this is now recited. It was supposed to be recited, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. He recited the Quran. The Sahaba, they recited the Quran. So an open recitation is an open challenge to all of the Quraysh, all of the pagan Arabs, all of those people who found themselves to be geniuses in their ability to express themselves and reality around them in very ingenious ways. They fell short of living up to the standard that the Quran brought. Now, when the Quran is recited, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you for each recitation. For each letter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you 10 times. Okay. You won't get that merit by reciting poetry. If you read poetry, if you compose poetry, you don't get that reward. So Allah's fadl on this ummah through the Prophet ﷺ is that when you recite wahi as a dhikr, that's why the word dhikr is important. The Quran is used as a dhikr. Dhikr means you recite. And with your recitation you are rewarded. The expression of this reward is in another world, not in this world. So it is independent of understanding or not understanding the Quran. You understand? Recitation is higher in ranks and merit than understanding. So the understanding comes over time, but the recitation is instantaneous. If you recite Alif Lam Mim, you are rewarded 30, but you don't understand it. And you may not understand it at all in this world. On the Day of Judgment, maybe, inshallah, in Jannah, hopefully you will understand what Alif Lam Mim is. In this world, you never understand it. Meaning that the effect of the Quran is eternal. Because it's the eternal word of Allah, when you recite it, you're bringing down the eternal effect of this recitation, which can never be found in any other intellectual formula that exists in the world. You can rattle off all the formulae in the world and all the other expressions and all the other quotes, you will not be rewarded for those. Right? But when you recite the Quran, you are rewarded instantaneously in Jannah. Allah will store your reward for you. 30 of them. 10 for Alif, 10 for Lam, and 10 for Mim. Now this reward is eternal. So the effect of recitation is eternal. The effect of understanding is within time and space. You understand within time and space, so now you have something that transcends time and space. For the reader, for the reciter, never mind the Prophet, never mind the Sahaba, what they read and what they understood is obviously very different. But for the average consumer of the Quran, if you want to use those words, it's a good language. We should become consumers of the Quran. We consume everything else under the sun. Perhaps we should consume the Quran a bit here and there. Recite it, you'll consume it, and you'll receive the reward for it. Now, the other effects of this recitation are, now obviously, they're intellectual, they're academic, they're spiritual, they're metaphysical, and sometimes they're even physical. Sometimes you get the barakah of the Quran when you recite it in this world, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, experience in your lives. Now, those are the residual effects. Okay? The greatest effect of the Quran is in the Akhirah, where Allah will reward you. And the residual effects are in this world that scintillate down. They trickle down in time and space. And those are academic and intellectual and physical and social and everything else which I just mentioned. لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. And that is where we get this tafsir from. So that he may warn with this Quran whoever is alive. The Quran is for living people, not for the dead. The Quran revives dead people. You understand? Yeah. Meaning the Quran, because it is eternal, it is full of life, full of inspiration, full of joy, full of happiness, full of jewels and gems and pearls, and full of treasures and glory and might and power. It gives you life, it gives you vitality, it gives you everything that you need. But it's only for those who are alive. لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا, so that he may warn those who are alive. If you're dead, the Quran doesn't mean anything to you. Or the flip side is, if you want to benefit from the Quran, you must believe that you are alive spiritually, not dead. So life here refers to the spiritual life of the reader, of the believer. And they say, now this Quran I'm going to take with me into my grave on the Day of Judgment and into Jannah. And then this is my prize from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this came to me through Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And I can reap the benefits of this Quran the same way that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did, and the same way that the Sahaba did. So it's an extension of life and extension of human life as a society. So you have the individual's life, the individual reciter, and you have societal life where the society now has lives. So now, once we stopped reading, reciting the Quran, we died. As an ummah. Right? People say you mustn't recite the Quran anymore. Okay, what else are you going to recite? It's not, ironically, those people who say don't recite the Quran, they're also the ones who say don't read anything either. Right? They don't believe in poetry either. Right? But this ummah has become so deprived in of itself that you can't recite the Quran anymore. Someone dies, don't recite the Quran. Why are you reciting the Quran? Don't recite Surah Kahf. Don't recite this. Is that something we can recite? The Quran Mubin means what? It's an open recitation. It's a recitation. And if for God's sake He revealed the Quran for recitation, recite it. Why are you telling people don't recite it? Which makes no social sense whatsoever. And since this movement of not reciting the Quran has taken over the ummah through those means and measures and types of people, this ummah has died. There's no barakah left in this ummah because the ummah doesn't consider the Quran to be alive. The Quran is just a dead book. No, bring it into life. Make the Quran alive in you, in your life, by reciting the Quran, either in salat, either in tahajjud, or either in your other times when you sit down and recite the Quran. Is not simply about understanding. Understanding means you come to Dar al-Qasim, you take courses and classes, then you understand the Quran. Understanding doesn't come when you read a translation. I'm going to say that's not going to happen. Not in a million years. You take it from me. You're never going to understand the Quran by reading the translation. It hasn't happened to anybody. Allah will not give you wahy ilham that you're going to recite the Quran in English, read the Quran translation in English, and understand. That's a process. Understanding something intellectually, academically, requires a process. That process may take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. It may take your whole lifetime. It doesn't matter. But it's a process. You have to follow that process before you say you're going to understand the Quran. That's how the Sahaba did it also. Even though they understood the words of the Quran, the meanings, the applied Quran came with the life of the Prophet ﷺ and their own lives that they understood the Quran this way and this way, portion by portion, piece by piece, and ayah by ayah, and surah by surah. But that did not preclude them from reciting the Quran. They all recited the Quran. Whether they understood or didn't understand, they all recited the Quran. So this ummah's fadila and fadl and merit and honor, and this ummah's societal life hinges upon its belief that the Quran is alive. لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا, so that the one who is alive is warned. You can't be warned if you're dead. And if you don't recite the Quran, or if you don't believe you have to recite the Quran, you're a dead person. Nothing is going to fall onto your ears, and you're not going to become a Muslim that lives by the Quran, Sunnah, simply because you're following one hadith or to hadith or this or that. That's not going to cut it for the ummah. Yeah, so the Quran has to become alive in the ummah, where you have recitation and recitation, not just in Ramadan, but also outside of Ramadan. And even then, in Ramadan, people say don't recite the Quran. There's no recitation left in the ummah, and we've been deprived, unfortunately, by the segments of the community and society who simply don't see any value to a spiritual life in Islam. And this is about the spiritual life of a Muslim individual and also a Muslim community. وَيُحِقِّ الْقَوْلَ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, and so that the truth may be established upon and against the non-believers. Allah's word is now established firmly for those who do not believe, that when they see the barakah of the Quran in the Muslim Ummah, that it's not like another book, because other books, they're read. The Quran is recited. There's a difference. Other books you read. You know, the Bible. They read the Bible. Okay, fine. You don't recite the Bible. The Quran is a book, but it's a recitation. Quran is a recitation. You recite it first, then you read it. Yeah, in that way and in that order. Once you maintain this order, then you'll see that society will have a very, very different approach to life. And you'll see that the blessings of this ummah is because of the Quran, is because of the person who received the Quran, is because we follow both. But unless we get to that stage, then we will not be raising our abilities to intellectualize our lives. So the application of the Quran definitely is in this world. For that we need to understand how to apply the Quran, which is one of the rights of the Quran upon us. But also the other right of the Quran upon us is its recitation, where the effect of the Quran definitely is in the Akhirah, where you're rewarded for recitation, regardless of whether you understand you don't understand. So there are two preoccupations. One is the recitation, and the other is the understanding. Both require time. So you need 15 minutes, half an hour recitation, and likewise you will need 2-3 hours of understanding, maybe in the week, maybe every day, Wallahu alam, according to your himmah and your determination. But the message here is clear, that as a footnote to those who are not able to remember anything before they die and they become senile, we have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears that people who recite the Quran, they're able to recite the Quran even at that age. We have seen people lose their faculties, and people who have had strokes, they will recite the Quran. There's a proof from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we open our eyes, you can explain it medically. Good luck with that. And who cares what the doctor says? The proof is that the man is reciting the Quran. He's paralyzed, but he recites the Quran. He doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember any motor skills. He has no ability to do anything, but he recites Surah Fatiha. He recites Surah Ikhlas. Okay, MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. There's an alim in England who was paralyzed and he could not move. He couldn't speak, he couldn't do anything. But since he recited the Quran every day and he was a hafiz of the Quran, the only thing he did do constantly as he was in that stage before he died was that he recited the Quran from memory. Every day for a few months. Every day. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Don't you understand? So the Quran gives you intellect. The Quran creates intellect. And that's why the Sunni position is that you don't contextualize the Quran with your aql, because you will fall short of that, and your inability to understand the Quran through your aql will be exposed. So the Quran contextualizes itself. The only way to understand the Quran is first to read it, recite it, and then go through a process of trying to understand it through the tools that we have available to us. So this is Quranun Mubin. It is a dhikr, it's a form of recitation, it's a form of ibadah and tasbih and dhikr, and it's also an open recitation where the recitation has effects in this world and more effects in the other world. With this we will inshallah stop and make dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tawfiq to recite the Quran, and gives us the tawfiq to understand the Quran, and gives us the tawfiq to implement and apply the Quran. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا رب.